The room fell silent the moment my son, Michael, stood up during our family gathering. He cleared his throat, looked around as if he were the new head of the household, and announced with full confidence, "Dad intended for me to inherit all 11 rental houses in New York. All of them, and sorry, Mom, that means you get nothing." His wife, Jennifer, clapped like she was at a Broadway show. I simply smiled, not a warm smile, the kind of smile that says, "Child, you have no idea." He froze. Jennifer snapped, "No idea about what?" I didn't answer, because they had forgotten something essential, something that was years in the making. Let me take you back, because what happened that day wasn't a coincidence. It was the final chapter of a story they never bothered to read. My name is Elena. I'm 64 years old, and for 4 decades I built a small empire beside my husband, Charles, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. While other families slept in on weekends, we were fixing pipes. While others splurged on vacations, we were repainting rental units in the middle of winter. 11 properties across New York, 11 steady streams of income. 11 monuments to sacrifice. When Charles passed away 3 years ago, something in my son shifted, not immediately, slowly, like a shadow rising behind him. Michael had always been our pride, our only child. We gave him every advantage: great schools, a strong upbringing, opportunities Charles and I never dreamed of. We raised him to be honest, decent, hardworking. But the day Charles closed his eyes for the last time, Michael opened his with ambition. At first, it was subtle. "Mom, maybe I should manage the properties now. You shouldn't stress yourself with numbers. I'll handle the accounts." It sounded helpful, protective even. But I knew every figure, every receipt, every tenant by name. I had managed those properties long before Michael was old enough to sign his homework. And then Jennifer entered the picture. Perfect hair, designer clothes. A smile sweet enough to rot teeth. From day one, she treated me not like family, but like an obstacle. "Mother-in-law," she'd purr, "why not let Michael take charge? Everything will be his one day anyway." That word eventually became her favorite. At dinners, at holidays, in phone calls, as if I were already gone. As if my 40 years of labor were an inconvenience blocking their future payday. They didn't know it then, but every word they spoke, every glance they exchanged, every greedy assumption they made was preparing me for a decision that would one day shock them both. Because the day Jennifer sat in my living room in a champagne dress and told me it was time to step aside, was the day I realized my own family no longer saw me as a mother, but as an obstacle they needed to remove. 6 months after Michael and Jennifer married, she arrived at my home dressed in a champagne-colored outfit that likely cost more than 1 month's rent at any of my properties. She sat on the very sofa where Charles and I used to plan our future, crossed her legs with exaggerated elegance, and smiled like someone rehearsing for a commercial. "Elena," she said, abandoning the word mother-in-law altogether, "Michael and I have been talking. We think it's time for you to rest. You've worked hard enough. You deserve to enjoy your old age." Old age, I was 62. I walked 3 miles every morning. I handled 11 properties alone. Paid every bill, solved every problem, remembered every number by heart. But in her eyes, I was already a frail woman waiting to crumble. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly, "but I can manage what Charles and I built." Her lips curled into that practiced smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Of course," she said, "but wouldn't it be simpler if Michael took over? After all, everything will be his eventually. Why wait? why wait? As if my existence was just a delay. As if I were a signature standing in the way of their early inheritance. Michael sat beside her, silent. My son, the child I raised through fevers, scraped knees, and heartbreaks, nodded in agreement with the woman who looked at me like a burdensome speed bump on the road to wealth. That was the first day I felt something cold settle in my own living room, not from the air conditioning but from betrayal. The realization that I was no longer seen as a mother but as property, but I said nothing, not then. I served them coffee, offered cookies, smiled politely, and after they left, I sat in the same spot where Jennifer had crossed her perfect legs and I closed my eyes. I thought of Charles, of every sacrifice we made. Of the nights we stayed awake worrying about mortgage payments. Of the mornings my hands bled from cleaning rental units alone. And of the son who now politely waited for me to step aside so he could take everything we bled for. And in that quiet moment I made a promise. If they wanted to play games, then I would play, but we would use my rules, not theirs, because Jennifer and Michael had forgotten something important, something that would one day shatter them. I wasn't just the wife of the man who built an empire, I was the woman who built it with him. And soon, Michael and Jennifer would make their boldest move yet, showing up with documents they dared to call a precaution. That was the moment I knew the real battle had begun. The months that followed were filled with strange visits, not warm, loving check-ins, but strategic stops disguised as family time. They came with smiles, desserts from expensive bakeries, and comments dipped in sugar but sharp enough to cut. One afternoon, Michael arrived with Jennifer. They didn't even bother with small talk. They went straight to the dining table, the same table where Charles and I had celebrated birthdays, cried over bills, and planned our future. Jennifer placed a thick stack of documents right in front of me. Her voice carried the sweetness of poisoned honey. "It's just a precaution," she said, "a simple power of attorney. In case something happens to you, Michael can make decisions for you." I stared at the papers. "If something happens to me," I repeated. Jennifer nodded like a saint. "Of course. It's just smart planning for someone your age." There it was again, age, that word she loved to weaponize. "I don't need this," I said. Michael sighed loudly as if I were a stubborn child refusing to eat my vegetables. "Mom, it's the sensible thing to do. It's for your protection." My protection? The same son who had been circling my properties like a hawk now claimed he wanted to protect me. I looked at both of them, Jennifer in a dress so pale it almost glowed, Michael in the suit I bought him for his birthday. Two people who saw my life's work not as legacy but as opportunity. "I'll think about it," I said. Jennifer pressed her lips so tightly the color drained from them. Michael's eyes narrowed in annoyance. They left without a goodbye hug, without warmth, without even pretending anymore. I didn't sign, not that day, not any other day. Because they didn't know something essential, something Charles taught me long before Jennifer ever stepped into our lives. Never show all your cards and never underestimate a woman who helped build an empire. But to understand why this moment didn't break me, why their tactics didn't work, you need to know who I was before all this. Before properties, before money, before betrayal, you need to know the woman who crawled out of nothing with Charles at her side. The woman they mistook for weak, the woman they thought would bend. They were about to learn the truth painfully. Because before I could protect myself from my own son, I had to revisit the beginning, the days when Charles and I scrubbed floors, counted pennies, and built everything they now tried to steal. Before Michael and Jennifer ever tried to corner me with papers and fake concern, there was a different life, a simpler, harsher, and far more honest one. A life that shaped the woman they thought they could manipulate. I met Charles when I was 24. Back then, I worked 3 cleaning jobs in downtown New York, scrubbing offices until my knuckles cracked and my hands smelled permanently of bleach and detergents. I'd collapse into bed after 12-hour shifts only to wake and do it again. Charles worked construction. He came home every evening with cement dust on his boots and sunburn on his arms. We had calluses instead of comfort, dreams instead of dollars, and love instead of luxury. We lived in a one-room apartment where the paint peeled off the walls. Our car was so old it coughed louder than the engine. Dinners were rice and casserole every day except Sundays, when we allowed ourselves something small like a shared pastry. But even with all that struggle, we had something priceless: vision. "Someday," Charles would say, spreading coins out on our tiny kitchen table, "we won't just rent, we'll own, we'll build something real." And we meant it. Every extra penny went into savings. No restaurants, no movies. No unnecessary purchases. Our life was work, sleep, and the dream of owning a property. It took 7 full years to save enough for the down payment on our first house. 7 years of saying no to everything except progress. The house was a disaster: cracked walls, rusted pipes, a roof that leaked every time it even thought about raining. But it was ours, and we fixed it with our own hands. Charles learned plumbing from library books and cheap video courses. I learned to paint, repair, patch, and manage tenants. We rented it out and used the money to buy a second house, then a third, then more. 40 years of sacrifice, 40 years of choosing long-term over short-term comfort. 40 years of building what Michael now believed was automatically his. While Michael grew up with stability, warm meals, safe homes, good schools, we were climbing ladders, scrubbing floors, negotiating with banks, fighting for a future he never had to struggle for. He never saw the nights Charles stayed up worrying about mortgage payments. He never saw my hands bleed from repairing a property by myself. He never saw his father work through fevers because we couldn't afford to miss a day. He only saw the result: 11 properties and a comfortable life. And that comfort blinded him. He thought it had come easily. He thought it would fall into his lap. He had no idea what it had cost. But while Charles and I built our empire through sweat and sacrifice, Michael's hunger for it grew in silence, and the day Charles fell ill would reveal just how deep that hunger went. Everything changed the year Charles got sick. It happened fast, too fast for my heart to catch up. One week he was fixing a loose railing at one of our rentals. The next week, doctors were speaking in low voices about an aggressive cancer that didn't intend to give him much time. 6 months, they said, maybe. During those 6 months, our days turned into hospital rooms, whispered conversations, late-night fears, and truths that couples only speak when they know time is running out. 3 months before he passed, one night stands out in my memory like a scar. The hospital hallway was quiet. Charles's room smelled of disinfectant and fading strength. He reached for my hand, his once strong fingers now trembling, cold. "Ella," he whispered, "listen carefully." "I'm listening," I said, though my heart was fighting the truth. "Everything we built is legally under my name more than yours." "That needs to change." I shook my head. "Not now, let's not talk about this now." "We must," he said, voice thin but firm. "Because when I'm gone, Michael is going to push. He is going to want control. He will pressure you." And if things are left as they are, he'll take everything. Michael would never, he looked at me with the honesty only a dying man can give. Are you sure of that? I didn't answer, because deep down even then I had already seen the hints. The way Michael asked about the properties, his sudden interest in rent amounts, his impatience when I made decisions alone. Charles squeezed my hand. The lawyer comes tomorrow. We're transferring everything to your name, all 11 properties. The accounts, everything. I felt my breath collapse. And Michael, he will get what's fair when you decide the time is right, not before. The next day, Rose, our lawyer, arrived. Short gray hair, tan suit, a woman who had seen every form of family betrayal in her career. Charles signed with trembling determination. I signed after him, and in that hospital room full of antiseptic and sorrow, the entire empire we built shifted into my hands. Before leaving, Rose looked at me closely. Keep these documents safe, and if you ever need me day or night, you call. Charles had concerns about your son, and I share them. I didn't want to believe her. But 3 months later, when we buried Charles under a sky full of cold rain, I watched Michael's face. Not grief, not devastation, something else, something calculating, and I knew Rose had been right. Because at the funeral gathering, before the flowers had even wilted, Michael cornered me in the kitchen to ask about the properties, and that was the moment I truly understood the battle ahead. Charles's funeral was held on a gray Tuesday, the kind where the sky seems to mourn with you. Umbrellas crowded the cemetery like dark flowers. Family members cried. Friends offered condolences. Jennifer wore a black dress, heels sinking into the wet ground, and a sad expression that looked just a little too staged. Michael cried loudly, dramatically, but even then something felt off. There was grief, yes. But beneath it, a glimmer of impatience, as if he were waiting for the day to end so something else could begin. After the burial, everyone came back to my home. The living room filled with relatives sharing stories about Charles, memories that warmed my aching heart. But while everyone else honored the man they loved, Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, impatient glances, glances that said, "When do we talk about what matters?" It didn't take long. As guests sipped coffee and wiped tears, Michael pulled me aside into the kitchen. Jennifer followed, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt like a trap. "Mom," Michael said, "we need to talk about the properties now." Now. On the same day we buried his father, Jennifer nodded, sliding closer. "It's better to handle these things immediately so there are no surprises." I stared at them, my son and the woman who had married him, and felt something inside me harden. "Surprises?" I repeated. "What surprises?" "Well," Michael said, "we want to know how things are legally, what Dad left, what's going to happen next." Jennifer chimed in, "It's only fair since Michael is your only child." Ah. There it was. Not even an hour after the funeral meal, they were circling the inheritance like vultures. "Everything is in order," I said calmly. "Your father left a will." Michael's eyes lit up. Hope, expectation, ownership. "And what does it say?" he asked. I looked at him steadily. "It says I decide what happens when I decide and how I decide." Silence fell so heavy the walls seemed to absorb it. Michael blinked rapidly. "What do you mean?" "It means your father trusted me to handle everything, and nothing passes to you until I choose." Jennifer's jaw tightened. "That doesn't make any sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said. "It was his choice." Michael's face reddened and Jennifer's controlled smile began to crack, but I didn't stay in that kitchen to listen to their anger. I walked out, among the people who actually mourned Charles. That day, a seed was planted inside Michael, one that would grow into desperation. And desperation is dangerous. Because soon, the subtle pressure would turn into open aggression, and the day Michael came to my house with contracts and threats was the day I realized my own son was prepared to destroy me to get what he wanted. The months after the funeral were some of the loneliest of my life, not just because Charles was gone, but because I began to realize my son had changed into someone I didn't recognize. Michael called often, but never to ask how I was coping or if I needed family around me. No, his calls always sounded the same. "Mom, the tenant from the Queen's house says there's a leak." "Did you call anyone?" "Mom, the rent from Staten Island hasn't hit yet. Did you check?" "Mom, you really should raise the rent. You're too soft. You're losing money." Always about the properties. Always about what he believed he would one day inherit. And Jennifer, she came by with expensive pastries and artificially sweet smiles. "Elena," she'd say sweetly, "you're handling too much. 11 properties are too many for you. Why not sell a few? You could relax, enjoy your twilight years." Twilight years. I was in better shape than both of them combined, but she kept pushing. "You know," she added one afternoon, "smart people avoid taxes by transferring assets early. If you just put a few properties in Michael's name now, the transition later will be smoother." I smiled politely. "I'll think about it," but we both knew I wouldn't. Their visits continued until one cold January afternoon when things escalated. I was making tea when I heard the door swing open. Michael didn't knock. He walked in with the confidence of someone entering property he believed he already owned. Jennifer followed him, not sitting but marching straight to the dining table, placing a thick folder of documents down with a thud. "Mom," Michael said, his voice cold, "we need to discuss this seriously." Jennifer slid the papers toward me. "We consulted a lawyer," she said proudly. "There are more efficient ways to manage your estate. A corporation, a trust with Michael as administrator. You would still get income, of course, but management would be more professional, more professional." As if 40 years of keeping everything afloat meant nothing. "I'm not interested," I said calmly. Michael leaned forward, jaw tightening. "Mom, you're not listening. This is what Dad would have wanted." That was the moment something inside me snapped. "Your father left everything to me," I said, "because he knew exactly what you would try." For the first time, Michael's mask slipped, his eyes hardened, his voice dropped. "Mom," he said sharply, "this isn't optional." Jennifer placed her hand on his, sealing their alliance. "Let's do this peacefully," she said. "Sign the papers." I looked at the two people I had once welcomed into my home with love. "Get out," I said quietly. They froze. "You're making a mistake," Michael hissed. "A big one." I pointed to the door. They left with fury in their footsteps. And that night, something became painfully clear to me. My son wasn't going to stop. Because the moment I realized Michael had crossed the line was when I discovered money missing, rents he had secretly collected behind my back. And that discovery changed everything. After I kicked Michael and Jennifer out of my house, the air felt lighter yet heavier at the same time. Lighter because I finally stood up for myself. Heavier because I knew I had just stepped into a storm, and storms reveal everything. For a while, Michael kept his distance. No surprise visits, no pressure, just short phone calls asking fake casual questions. "Mom, did the Bronx tenants pay?" "Mom, any issues with the building in Queens?" "Mom, do you need help collecting this month?" I sensed something off. His tone wasn't concerned, it was expectant, like he was waiting for me to slip. Then, one evening, I sat at the dining table with my bookkeeping folders, something I hadn't done thoroughly in a while, not since Charles passed. That's when the numbers betrayed him. 3 properties, 3 months in a row were missing deposits. At first, I thought maybe the tenants were late, maybe someone forgot, but something in my gut whispered, check, so I called them. One tenant said, "Oh, I already paid Michael." He said he was handling the rent collections now. Another said the same, and another. My hands went cold. I asked casually, "Did he give you receipts?" They all said no. He told us he'd update the records later. By the time I hung up the last call, I already knew the truth. Michael wasn't helping me. He wasn't stepping in as the devoted son he pretended to be. He was stealing from me. I called Rose immediately. She arrived with her notepad, her briefcase, and her usual calm. "How much?" she asked. I showed her my calculations. 8 months, 3 properties, a total of $42,000 gone. Her lips tightened. "Elena, this isn't confusion, this is theft." "He's my son," I whispered. "No," she replied gently but firmly. "Right now he's a thief and you must protect yourself." My stomach twisted. I didn't want to press charges. I didn't want my son in handcuffs, but Rose wasn't asking me to. She was preparing something else. "We're documenting everything," she said. "Every missing dollar, every message, every visit, every attempt to pressure you. This is evidence, and someday you may need it." Her voice lowered. "And trust me, Michael will push again. This is only the beginning." I didn't want to believe her, but she had been right every time. Because only days later, Jennifer stormed into my home with a glossy real estate magazine in hand, ready to push harder than ever. And that was the moment I realized they weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Because when Jennifer tried to convince me to sell my home and move into a senior apartment for my own good, I finally uncovered the truth behind their obsession, the mountain of debt crushing them. 3 days after discovering the missing rent money, Jennifer arrived unannounced, heels clicking like warnings across my hardwood floor. She didn't bother greeting me, she didn't sit, she didn't even pretend to be warm. Instead, she set a glossy real estate magazine on my table and tapped her perfectly manicured nail on a page. "There," she said, "this is where you should live." I looked down, a senior living complex. Small rooms, shared dining halls, everything beige and lifeless. "Jennifer," I said slowly, "why would I leave my home?" She exhaled dramatically, the kind of sigh people use when they're pretending to care but can't hide their impatience. "Because it's safer, Elena. You're living in a house that's too big for you, too much work, too many responsibilities. A senior community is perfect. You'd be around people your age." There it was again, age, her favorite sword. "And," she added, sliding into the chair opposite me, "selling this house would give you a nice nest egg. You could use it for your needs, medical bills, emergencies, things old people deal with." Old people, she was relentless. "And what happens to the properties if I move?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jennifer smiled, a thin smile stretched tight with greed. "Well, obviously Michael would take over managing everything fully. You'd finally be able to relax. He's already doing so much." Doing so much? He had stolen $42,000. "And the rent money he's been collecting recently?" I asked. Her eyes flickered, only for a second, but enough. "Michael is trying to help," she snapped. "If tenants paid him directly, it's because they trust him. Maybe you should too." Her tone slipped. "No, honey, no disguise." I leaned back, watching her. The expensive clothes, the designer purse, the unreachable lifestyle she flaunted like a trophy, it finally clicked. You and Michael are in debt, I said quietly. Jennifer froze, her eyes widened not in surprise but fear. A truth she never wanted spoken aloud. You don't know what you're talking about, she muttered, looking away. Oh, but I do, I said. Your sudden obsession with selling properties, pushing documents, wanting everything transferred early, it's not about me, it's about your financial mess. Jennifer's mask shattered. You're being selfish, she erupted. We're drowning. Michael has loans, business failures, credit card debt. We need stability. We need, not you need, not mom, let us help, just we need your money. So, I said softly, you want me to fix your debt by giving up my life's work? She didn't answer, she didn't have to, I already knew. When she finally stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames, I felt something inside me harden into steel. They weren't going to stop, they weren't going to give up, and they weren't afraid of hurting me to get what they wanted. But they were about to learn something they never expected. I was not the one who needed protecting. Because the day they walked into a lawyer's office to challenge my ownership, thinking they could outsmart me, was the day they discovered Charles had left them a surprise they were never prepared for. It all came to a head on a warm morning in July. I was watering my garden when I saw Michael's car pull up, followed immediately by another, sleek, black, and unfamiliar. Jennifer climbed out first, followed by a sharply dressed man carrying a briefcase. A lawyer. They didn't even greet me. Jennifer marched straight up the walkway like she owned the place. Elena, she said stiffly, we're going to settle this today. Michael avoided my eyes. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Elena, your son believes the properties legally belong to him following his father's passing. He wants to challenge the transfer of ownership. So this was it. They actually thought they could take me to court. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I simply said, follow me. I led them inside and placed a thick folder on the table, one tied with a silver ribbon. Charles's handwriting still marked the cover. This, I said, is the real surprise. I watched confusion spread across their faces. The lawyer began flipping through the pages. His eyebrows rose higher and higher. Michael leaned in. What is it? What's she hiding? Jennifer hovered nervously beside him. The lawyer finally closed the folder and cleared his throat again, this time his voice much quieter. Mr. Michael, everything your father owned, every property, every account, every asset was transferred to your mother months before his death. Legally, fully, irrevocably, Michael blinked. No, that can't be right, Dad said. He said, no, I said softly. Your father knew and he protected me. The lawyer continued, additionally, Mr. Charles left a notarized statement expressing concern that you might attempt to pressure or manipulate your mother. His instructions were to secure everything in her name to prevent that. Jennifer swallowed hard, her face drained of color. And, the lawyer added, given the evidence of unauthorized rent collection, if your mother wished to pursue charges, she would have a solid case. Michael stepped back as if he'd been struck. You reported me, he whispered. I documented everything, I said, because your father told me to be ready. For the first time in months, the house fell silent. No threats, no pressure, just the truth. Jennifer grabbed her purse, muttering something under her breath. She rushed out the door, heels clacking like tiny explosions across the driveway. Michael stayed frozen. Son, I said gently, you didn't lose the properties. You lost your way. He lowered his head and left without another word. I stood at my window watching him drive away, knowing life would never be the same, but knowing I had finally protected everything Charles and I built, and myself. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful, emotional tales just like this one, make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Book. Drop a like, comment your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay wise, and I'll see you in the next video.